Welcome back to 8 Cubes, the show where we break down Marvel Snap's 8 most important topics. We're going to start with the card coming out on Tuesday. His name is Bastion. Now, you may recognize him from X-Men 97. He is a techno-organic virus-infected human who turns people into sentinels, and his card in Marvel Snap does very much the same thing. A 4/3 that makes copies of the cards at the location you play it, your cards, and sets their power to 3 and their cost to 2. So he makes little sentinelized versions of the cards at the location that he's played. I personally think that this is a card that's going to have a big release because he will make people play decks that are already good. Because the two obvious decks to play with this guy are Cerebro 3 and Victoria Hand, which relative to where they're going to be after Bastion comes out, I don't even know if he's going to make those decks better, but I do know that he's going to make a bunch of people that are playing decks that are worse than them play them.
Yeah, no, I like this card a lot, by the way. Because the use case is very obvious and it's obviously gonna be quite powerful, right? Like the Cerebro one, it's not just about like obviously you play Cerebro on 3, you play this, you get another Cerebro, then you got Cerebro and Mystique. Like you could the thing I'm thinking of right now is that you just always have fuel for your Cerebro, right? Even if you're not like adding a Cerebro back to your hand, you're adding like a 3 cost 3 power thing back to your hand that will cost 2, which is discounted, which means it works like to fit into the curve with Cerebro as well. And obviously the best case is you just grab the Cerebro that you play on 3 and then it's insane, right? So I think this makes a lot of sense in that deck for sure. At the same time, for Victoria Hand on, it's a bit more interesting because I think, like, I agree with you. You should already be playing Victoria Hand decks, right? Like the deck's already like really good on its own right now. This one kind of, I would say definitely if you pull it off on curve, it will make it better, right? But like, I don't actually think you need to pull this off to make Victoria Hand good. It's just that if you do it, definitely makes a lot of sense. But yeah, so I agree with you on the fact that like this card will allow people to feel like they want to explore those decks that I think are really good. Well, Cerebro, you guys know my bias against Cerebro. Like, I never liked the deck, but like this card makes it seem that Cerebro can have insane power output. So something that I think is worth considering it. Is to play Cerebro, even though I don't like the deck. But
I mean, I think Cerebro 3 is already quite good. I think Victoria Hand is already quite good. And I think that this card will take people out of playing whatever mid deck they were playing for the sake of novelty. And then this card will provide enough novelty to make those decks the decks that people are playing for the sake of novelty. Which means that I expect Bastion, regardless of whether or not he's actually good in these decks, to get a warm reception from a lot of people who just haven't been playing these decks despite the fact that they are very good. This is a card I expect people to be pretty high on, regardless of how good he actually is. And I do think it is up for debate how good he actually is in these shells, because I am tempted to say that he's gonna be very, very limited in terms of application. He's almost like a 4-cost activate when you really get down to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to play him on 4 or 5, and if you don't, he's not good. And especially in V-Hand, there's a lot of conflicts with 4 and 5 specifically. Would you rather play Misery on 4, V-Hand Frigga on 5? Probably, right? And so you end up with this guy having a lot of very high level competition, even in the deck that he wants to go in. But there is really cool stuff that he can do, even stuff that's not the very obvious V-Hand Cerebro stuff, like copying, say, it'll still happen in V-Hand and Cerebro probably. But like, for example, what if you just play a Negasonic on turn 3, Bastion the Negasonic on turn 4, and then you have a 2/3 Negasonic on turn 5, right? Like that you can do in Cerebro. That's just very powerful, totally agnostic of copying Cerebro. Stuff like that. Like, what if you are copying a Moonstone? What if you are willing to bite the bullet and be a Magic deck and you're copying an Iron Man, right? Like, that's kind of the genre of stuff I expect to see out of this card. There's going to be V-Hand decks, there's going to be Cerebro decks, and there's going to be Magic decks. And I think those are sort of what you're going to be looking to see on day 1 of Bastion.
Yeah, I think like you said, right? At baseline, it is decent, but at the same time, you definitely want to be copying cards that have like compounding effects, right? Because you need to remember that you're playing a 4/3. 4/3 is generally not a good stat line. So whatever you grab with this guy has to, how should I put it? Like make up for the fact that you played a 4/3. So I guess Cerebro makes sense, and stuff that like doubles, triples, or multiplies is something that you wanna target.
Yeah, and Negasonic I think is an interesting point here because it is a card that doesn't, when you look at it, you're like, why does that scale with itself? But it does, in the sense that when you blow up
It
something on
deletes
turn
their
3 with a
big thing.
Negasonic,
Yeah.
it becomes more important that they play other things into other lanes, right? And then you blow up
Yeah.
one of those other things as well, right? Like you're just limiting the amount of cards they get to play. It doesn't literally scale with itself, but in certain matchups against like a curve out deck like Wiccan, it kind of functionally scales with itself. Viv Vision. Now, I've seen a lot of people talking about how Viv Vision needs a buff, and I'm not exactly convinced of that. Like, I don't think she's the world's greatest card. I don't think she's Mr. Fantastic level busted, but I don't think that season passes need to be Mr. Fantastic level busted. And I think actually that the Marvel Snap players have a pretty poor track record at evaluating how good a card actually is if it's not incredibly busted on the season pass. I think if cards are not obviously busted, people treat them like they are very bad. As an example, I will talk about Galactus First Steps, which was actually the 15th most played card in the Golden Gauntlet. It is very clearly one of the best cards in its role as big 6-drop. Sometimes there are metagames where we care about big 6-drop. Sometimes there are metagames where we don't care about big 6-drop, but he's a good card in his role, and everyone sort of treated him like he was just absolute garbage because he wasn't instantly breaking the game in a very unfair way, the way some other previous cards have done. And I think that overreacting to that, like that sort of set expectation of season pass cards must be a certain level of power, I think overreacting to that could be a mistake. That said, I could see them giving her an extra point of power, but I do think that a lot of her issues in terms of perception are perception issues. The card is fine. That is a fine card to have in your game. It is a card that gates a lot of its power behind putting the effort in to get it. I do think there is a meaningful difference between 3s and 4s in terms of follow-ups to Viv. There are far less good follow-ups to Viv than there are to, say, Iron Patriot, and that does impact her power, and that is really important because a lot of your 4s are Galactas and Gwenpools. A lot of the 3s are just like Gladiators and Copycats. It's a much bigger jump from 2 to 3, from your 2 to your average good stuff 3 than it is from 3 to your average good stuff 4. So her 3-2 does matter a lot. But also, I'm not sure I want her to be like Mr. Fantastic good. Like, I just think this card running around a lot and defining mid-range mirrors would be really, really, really unpleasant gameplay. So I think she's probably in about the right spot, even if she can get a buff.
Yeah, so the thing about this card is that, well, I think one thing that you mentioned is really, I think the most important thing with this card, and why it's like, in its current state, it just feels very okay, you know.
Yes.
It's because, like you said, the jump from 2 to 3 and the jump from 3 to 4 in terms of power level is very different, right? Like, because Iron Patriot, and then thereafter you play like a Gladiator or something really big. Like the jump from 3 to 4 is not that much bigger, right? Like,
Yeah.
like 3s are just insanely powerful in terms of stats. 4s are okay, but not as much as 3s. So I kind of get why like people might think that this card just doesn't go off as often as you would like, you know. But then again, the most I've seen this card go off is you just put it in the right location, you know. Like you just put it in the right place. And then if you make the smart read or the correct read, you just get the buff one time and it's enough, you know. It's not so much about just like playing a big 4 in that location. It's just the first time you put it onto the board, you get it right, you know. So I think that's like the main way you get the effect off. I've rarely seen the effect go off multiple times because clearly your opponent's going to contest right after seeing the Viv Vision there. So the fact that it's constantly, I mean, not constantly, the fact that it gets that one buff off and then never gets the buff off again, I think is fine. You know, if it becomes too easy to get like multiple or triple buffs off from this guy, then a little bit too powerful, I would say. Definitely a bit too powerful because, like you said, it would define mid-range mirrors if it gets too many buffs off. So the fact that it's currently in a position whereby it can get that one buff off and that's it. I like it where it is, honestly. Don't think we need to buff, or no, definitely not nerf, but don't think we need to buff this card even more.
I think she could afford getting a buff. Like, I think it would be
Like
a
one
good
power?
thing. Yeah, I think it would be a good thing to
Okay.
buff a card like this, but I really don't want them to be aggressive buffing her. If they are aggressive buffing this card, it could be a very unpleasant experience, is sort of my
Agree.
general read on her. So, first of all, good job changing the super premium season pass to be purchasable with tokens. I've seen some pushback on the idea where it's like, oh, this makes the whole game more expensive. And I think that's largely the kind of thing that doesn't really make sense to me as a critique, where it's like, oh, I'm now spending 3,000 more tokens if I want to get all the cards, where it's like no other you're not approaching that in that way with like Magic the Gathering. You're not saying I need every card in the game with Magic the Gathering. I don't know. It is a little bit odd. I do think that generally speaking, removing a hard paywall is a good thing. A lot of the things that are bad about Marvel Snap's like card acquisition, it's not just the numbers that people attach to the card in terms of how much they cost. It's the fact that everything is like FOMO'd in this way. Buy it or you can't for a month. And I think that that is a bad thing. And I think removing an aspect of the game where they do the bad thing is a good thing. And yes, it comes with trade-offs, but I'm still going to think it's a good thing when they do it. And I think you can sort of see it, right, in the amount of people that are actually playing Sparky, which maybe that's just down to him being quite good, but I've seen a lot more of Sparky than I have of basically any previous Super Premium Season Pass card. So that's probably good news in terms of, card acquisition is actually getting better for this specific card, one per season.
I mean, I just really want to talk about the card. I really want to talk about the fact that I think this card is amazing. You know, like I mean, we talked about it last week and said that like move bouncer, but clearly this card also just enables move in general, right? Like move in general is just so amplified by this card. Like so much power moving the torch, right? Obviously, I mean dagger, yeah, but mainly torch. Torch is insane. So like moving the torch with this and stuff like that, it's just so much power, and you can even run Cosmo in normal move, and I think that's super important, right? Cosmo's just like you play a 3-mana 3/3, obviously it's understated, but then you compensate with like Omega levels of power after playing your 3/3 floodgate, you know, and Sparky just lets you kind of do that. So I really think this card it's a good powerful card that's introduced into the game, and obviously it only works in specific spots, you know, specific decks that amplify its power a lot, which is fine, I guess. Like you create a very powerful card that works in specific spots. We talked about this before, right? Like you want to create a card that only works in 1 or 2 decks. Make sure it does its job, right? Make sure it's like good enough to be in that deck. If not, that deck wouldn't be played. You know, like there's been a lot of cards that like they created that are only supposed to go in 1 or 2 spots, but it doesn't fulfill a role that's good enough to bring the deck back into the meta. Whereas obviously in this case, Sparky clearly just makes move really very relevant, right? Tech card plus a lot of points, simple recipe for success. So yeah, I think obviously you can still play Sparky in move bounce, but like, I think Sparky in normal bounce really just like screams to me as like this card just did its job really well.
Yeah,
normal
one
move.
thing
Sorry.
that really, one thing that really, I wasn't gonna mention it. One thing that really highlights Sparky's power though. And I think this is an interesting dynamic because whenever you play a move deck, you run into this thing where it's like, all right, I didn't draw Human Torch. Do I use the Sparky or do I save it for a potential Human Torch top deck on 6, right? Like that kind of stuff. Because Sparky is so dramatically better with Human Torch than he is with literally any other card in the entire game. It is not possible for there to be a better card with Sparky than Human Torch. That is the guy, right? And in that vein, if you're investing heavily in Human Torch, this is a weird sentence, but it makes the 3-cost Human Torch a buff. Because you are investing very heavily in Human Torch. You are counting on Human Torch to win a lane. Now it doesn't die to your opponent's Killmonger. You get to feel very good about that. Like that is a big deal for these decks, is that they can slightly more safely invest in this card. But the other thing that I run into when I play them is like, okay, I've got my 40 power Human Torch. 40 power wins basically any lane in this current metagame. How am I winning lane number 2? And the reason Big Move does a little bit better than Move Bounce is because it can just like play Hellion and Heimdall and like stack up stats and be like, you first of all, you don't know where the Human Torch is going to be. But second of all, I probably have a bunch of stats and or an Alioth or Cosmo to just win another lane, right? And I think that's part of what I like about it. It's got big Cravens in it. It's a better Craven deck, I think, because of Hellion and Heimdall than move bounces. So if you don't have like your dagger, you have another avenue to getting to that 1 second lane.
Yeah, shout out to Hellion, man. Like I remember so many months ago we talked about when Hellion was just releasing. We were like, oh, it's just gonna be like the better.
We believed in it.
Yeah, we did rate it relatively well. I if I recall correctly, we were like, oh, it's gonna be like better Legion, and like probably not at this point in time. But I didn't take long for it to actually be better Legion, you know, because it actually has a deck that like relies on it. and it's a decent stat line. So yeah.
Moira X, 1/2 when she dies, add a copy of your opening hand to your hand. This is another card that I think is like, I'm gonna go play V hand. I'm gonna put Moira X in it, and you just like playing a worse V hand deck, but at least you're playing a V hand deck. So like there is that. I gotta tell you, I'm not impressed with the V hand version of Moira X. I have been shockingly impressed with the Destroy Moira X in the sense that like I normally am pretty low on Destroy. I played Moira X Destroy, and it's like, is this always a great thing? No, but it's pretty often pretty good. Like, there are some dud Moira openers, but like just pretty much anything that's going to be like a reasonable hit. Like, you get an extra thing that goes boom, right? You usually are stuck on things that goes boom. Sometimes you run out of those, right? She makes sure you don't run out of those. You get an extra death. Obviously, that is amazingly good. You get an extra, copy of an X-23 or a Wolverine. That's pretty good too. You're usually just pretty happy to weave that in and get some extra destroy procs and get some extra procs on your null, extra procs on your death. I've been pretty surprised at how good she is, but I will say a lot of that is because you can no longer play Arnim Zola because there's a lot of Stardust running around, and that's illegal. You're not legally allowed to do that anymore. And Shang-Chi isn't very good in this metagame, so you just kind of have an open slot that would normally be Zola or Shang-Chi, and that's where I've put Moira.
Yeah, the thing about Moira is, firstly, the V-hand thing, right? It's so interesting that like every new card that gets released that could be in the V-hand deck just doesn't really make the cut. Right? I mean, maybe even Bastion doesn't make the cut. It could. But like just thinking about it, like all the original V-hand shell is already so strong, right? Just the basic stuff. Like you don't have space for more. You don't have the turns and the mana to fit more. So like with the whole V-hand thing, I feel like it's really difficult to fit new stuff in. It's like the next V-hand card that fits the V-hand deck has to replace one of the core in the V-hand deck, and that's gonna be like difficult to do, right? Yeah, so that's the thing about the V-hand deck. But for Destroy, I just think I'm still very low on Destroy in general because it just feels like a deck that just needs to draw cards in the right order more than any other deck, and even then the power output is not crazy. Like other than specifically getting like more deaths, other than that, I think the deck is still just But yeah, I know you're not trying to say that the deck is suddenly insane. You're just saying that like it works, right? Like Moira works in that style, and Arnim Zola is like illegal now, which I get. So yeah, I guess if you're a Destroy enjoyer, you can pick up Moira just because it works in the deck. But no, I'm not too high on it for sure.
I think it's just relatively well positioned in the sense that like there just kind of aren't a lot of decks that can ever beat a Deadpool that gets big early. For the record, like Deadpool Agony,
it's basically like a torch, right? It's basically like a torch of sorts.
Yes, it's the exact same thing it's the same dynamic as Move, where it's like if they get their Human Torch and Sparky, that's like you getting your Deadpool Agony, right? And it's just like, oh, well, I've won one lane. And for the record, I actually think Destroy is like a little better at winning lane number 2 than Move is. It just has more other stuff in the deck. It's just a lot, it is like in a fairly similar spot. Yeah, it's a lot more setup. It is in a fairly similar spot, though, in terms of like dynamics with the current metagame. And it does get a little bit more hosed by Stardust and Mobius randomly hitting you, right? You have Stardust turns off your X-23, turns off your Wolverine, Mobius turns off your Death. Like, there's definitely things that can go bad for you. But also, like, if you get a 40 power Deadpool, that just like wins a lane. Like, there's really not another way around it. Like, a 40 power Deadpool wins a lane. A 20 power Deadpool probably wins a lane. But like a 40 power Deadpool definitely wins a lane. Discard won the Golden Gauntlet, and I think that it is doing a lot of just like attempting to target relatively low power tech decks, which I think is a good spot to be in. It's easy to look at Discard and say like, oh, Discard, you're playing Khonshu, that gets hit by Stardust. Oh, you're playing Proxima, that gets hit by Stardust. How are you targeting these tech decks? And the answer is just like, even if you aren't doing those things, you're still just going to play cards that have more power than their cards. Like, oh, yeah, okay, so my Khonshu is just a 6/12. Okay, I'll play a 6/12. That's still bigger than your guys. My Dracula is still hitting Apocalypse. My MODOK is a 5/7. That's not great, but it's pumping my other cards in my hand. I have all of these cards that generate power on the board, and I'm just saying, like, look, you're not actually stopping me from executing my game plan here. It's just not actually a relevant thing. And I'm going to have more points than you in the average game. I'm going to go power to power, and I'm just going to have more points. And I think that's largely why Discard won. But I also want to shout out the player, the Electric Flame, who in the final turns of the final game, like made some really, really impressive reads, fully abandoning a Gamma Lab because of the way it would take his opponent on a fire hair iteration of the Morgan Le Fay deck off of their game plan and targeting other lanes instead, ended up winning the other 2 lanes while his opponent had 36 power in a Gamma Lab because their game plan was disrupted that way. I think that kind of stuff is not going to be the normal experience for someone playing discard, and you should be like aware that you have to be game planning for the entire game when you play a deck like that. It is very much like, I need to know what my opponent is likely to be able to do and then make my plays for it.
Yeah, so I think what I want to say in this topic is not so much about like the discard deck itself, but because we mentioned Mobius and Stardust, and how you also mentioned that discard, despite being affected a bit by that, that still probably can beat the Mobius and Stardust deck. It's very simply because the thing about tech decks, right, is just that once your tech fails, right, like at the end of the day, if your tech doesn't work super well versus your opponent's deck, you're just left with a pile of stats, right? And then in the current iteration of like Stardust and Mobius decks, the pile of stats that you have is actually quite small. Like the stats is not a lot, you know. So like this card just generally has like a bit more stats than you, despite sometimes some of their cards being affected by your tech, you know. It's like that. That's why, again, back to the past, which is why Thanos ongoing was so good of a Mobius deck, right? Because even if somehow you were playing against a deck that had 0 like downside into your Mobius, right, your deck is still like a lot of stats because Spectrum buffs everything, every damn thing, you know, including the Mobius itself. So it's like, even as a tech deck, if you are a tech deck that somehow can find a way to amass a lot of points, aka Thanos ongoing back then you probably are just the best deck in the game. But in this current scenario, Stardust, Mobius, dot deck is not exactly the best deck in the game, in my opinion, simply because if your tech fails, you're just left with a bunch of below average stats for like card cost.
Yeah, I like the Stardust Mobius decks because I love being the side that just beats Hela, and I appreciate being able to do that. But what it does is basically, but what it does is basically push decks that would lose to Hela, but still beat you into the forefront of the metagame. Discard, V-Hand, stuff like that ends up being a big part of the metagame because it's effectively able to middle it, right? As long as the people are playing Stardust Mobius, the decks like Mr. Negative and Hela that would go over the top of it are not going to be relevant in the metagame, and it can go over the top of the decks that are beating those decks. I have a gripe. I don't normally just like whine about card acquisition. I'm about to whine about card acquisition, okay? So I don't like playing High Voltage. So I didn't play High Voltage. Airwalker, not a great card. Okay, then Morgan Le Fay decks start playing Airwalker, and I'm like, oh man, do I have to go get this card? I have a lot of conversations with my friends. We come to the conclusion, and I still think this is the correct conclusion, that Airwalker decks are most likely just like worse versions of Bounce, worse versions of various V-Hand decks. They're doing the same thing, which is outputting a lot of power on the final turn of the game in confusing ways, but largely they end up being worse. They do have the competitive advantage of being Killmonger decks, and now we're coming up on a mid-deck Monday. And I really want to play Airwalker V-Hand. I think that would be a really fun thing to do. It's very mid. It did come in second in the Golden Gauntlet. I still think it's very mid. But I can't, because I can't go out and get Airwalker right now. And I just wanted to talk about like the various game modes they do, because one of the worst things about High Voltage for me is that it's purely chores. I don't want to play the game mode. I want to play normal Marvel Snap. But if I want this card, not only do I have to play the game mode, I have to log on like 3 times a day, which I don't normally do. I have to, if I don't want to do that, I have to spend money. But I don't get to like not play the game mode if I spend money. I have to spend money for the privilege of new missions in the game mode. I hate it. Just like, good Lord, just let me buy the card, right? This is why I'm so pro the Sparky thing, right? Where it's like, okay, you know, yes, they did make it 6,000 tokens instead of 3,000 when they took the $10 off of it. Like, yes, sure, okay. You could be upset about that if you want, but just not having a card be acquirable is so bad. And I'm so glad they got rid of it with Sparky, and I really hope they get rid of it with this other stuff too.
Yeah, I mean, most of the like other games out there right now that have a simple they have this simple system whereby if you want to whale, you can get the stuff. If you don't want to
Yeah.
whale, there is the play through everything option. But like this current system with this card is kind of like you are paying to get missions, right?
Yeah, you
To
gotta pay and play. It's the same as Kid Omega,
you gotta
right?
pay for the missions. Like the whole reason why people are paying is to skip the time constraint, the time of the missions. So it's like you're paying for missions. So I mean, it does kind of like shorten it a bit, but at the same time, you are still not fully grasping the essence of why people want to pay. People want
Yeah.
to pay to skip the dawdle and effort of everything. Like obviously, people that don't want to pay, yeah, you got to go through the process, right? But if I'm intending to pay, I'm intending to pay for the thing. As in,
Yeah.
obviously, if the standard of it was to for every other game in the world to be pay so you get the missions, then fine. But it's never been that way. It's always been pay for the thing, And if you don't want to pay, then grind. So personally, I would definitely prefer if I were to pay, just give me the damn thing.
Yeah, like the idea is my money is worth more to me, is worth less to me than my time.
The
So I'm
time,
going to give you
yes.
my money so I can keep my time. And high voltage is like, actually pay me money and also pay me time. And it's like, why do I have to do that? I hate you. I don't want to do that. Stop making me do that. Funnily enough, this is the exact same section as a week ago because I feel like I've been talking about this for like 3 weeks where it's like, Week 1 was, what is the good Stardust and Mobius deck? Week 2 is, we found the good Stardust and Mobius deck. And Week 3, this week, is the consequences of finding the Stardust and Mobius deck, because this is patient 0 for the metagame. Or really, like, I would say it's probably more like level 1, right? Level 0 of this metagame was a bunch of people playing like Redshift Hella and various piles of Pixie stuff and Mr. Negative and just being like, haha, you can't stop me, because the Stardust Mobius deck got nerfed. And so it was like, we need to figure out what the hell we're supposed to do with these cards. We did that. Now people are not playing those decks. They're playing decks that are less affected by Stardust and Mobius, but still go over the top of most Stardust Mobius decks, which kind of leaves us at, are we allowed to be flexible with being a Stardust Mobius deck? Because originally I tried Thanos ongoing for Stardust Mobius. I was like, that's a really good place to do it. But what I ran into was, if you don't have Stardust by 4 against Hela, you kind of just eat it. But now that less people are playing Hela, maybe that's a thing we can do. Maybe we can try to get more points into those shells by giving up some of our consistency at accessing the tech, right? Maybe we can actually stop playing some of the tech and just try to go taller than the decks that are trying to go taller than us, which will leave a space for decks like Hela to re-enter the metagame. This is fluid. There are fluid things happening here.
Actually, I had this question just popped up in my head while you were saying that piece, which is, you said consistency in accessing the tech, right? Like to me, it's just like how like at the end of the day, it's just about drawing the thing right on curves.
Yeah.
Like it's not like you can do anything. You don't have a tutor for like
Oh, no,
what's
I
that
just
called,
mean
for
like
Mobius and
when you
Stardust.
play Thanos, you are less likely to have Stardust on 4 than when you play a deck that has
you
12
mean like
cards
yeah,
in it.
okay.
Yeah, like, that's
Right,
all.
right,
That's
right,
all. I
right.
mean,
Yeah,
it's
I
like
was just thinking,
I tried Thanos before I got to the Invisible Woman versions of the deck, right? And it was just
yeah.
like, what I kept running into was, if I don't have this card by 4, I am dead. So if that's
Yeah.
less true, then maybe we can go back to Thanos and get more points into the shell.
Yeah, definitely. That makes a lot of sense. Like at the end of the day, the thing about Thanos is like it's just a bigger a bigger deck, right? So at the end of the day, if you if you really want to draw a card specifically by 3 or 4, Thanos might not be the deck,
Yeah.
But like Thanos worked out in the past just because you get to buff everything. So like you say, right? Like at the end of the day, if Hela is not as prevalent, you don't always have to have the Mobius and Stardust on curve. But the funny thing is, Mobius and Stardust are cards that you want on curve, like you, because the funny thing is you want both, right? So in the past it was like, okay, I can get Mobius on 4, but the thing is, if you now you have Stardust on 4, so you kind of want the Mobius on 3, so you can do actual points things on 5 and 6, so I think at the end of the day, no matter how we go around it, if you're playing a Mobius and Stardust deck, I feel like you still want the Mobius and Stardust on curve, right? Regardless of whether Hela is like prevalent or not, because like the later you draw them, you kind of need them to win, unless you're trying to tell me that you don't need them to win in that matchup.
Yeah.
Because the later you draw them means like the later you get to do the things you want to do on 5 and 6, or you get to never do the things you want to do on 5 and 6 because you need to play the 4. Yeah.
Lastly, I do think this is a good metagame, and I think this is largely a victory for them printing cards like Stardust. I think a lot of people look at a card like Stardust and they're like, that is too obvious of a card. It's either going to be bad or it's going to be good. But what it does in metagames like this is generate flux. It generates changes, right? I don't think that the decks that won Golden Gauntlet, came in second to Golden Gauntlet, would have done so if this was not a relatively Stardust heavy metagame, right? I think that Stardust existing pushed combo decks down. I think that Mobius existing pushed combo decks down. And now you saw decks that are beating up on the Floodgate decks by just doing points well, sort of pseudo combo high synergy decks like Discard. Now people are going to have to rethink being a Floodgate deck at all. And that means that there's room for those combo decks to cycle back into the metagame, which will then get gated by the Floodgate decks. We have entered a phase of genuine metagame flux where things are changing very often, which I would consider a good metagame.
Yeah, I mean, they still haven't changed the fact that Misery is a 4/9, but that Misery stays a 4/9. So the deck is good even if Misery wasn't a 4/9. But that's not my point. My point is just that, like, yeah, I agree. Right now, like, you can probably play like most of anything. I wouldn't say anything, but like everything is like sort of like decently playable. You know, your tech decks are not also power decks. You know, like I said, if your tech decks have obscene amounts of power, that's also a problem. You want to play a bit more niche tech decks that have more power, you got to play those that are a little bit more inconsistent compared to the usual stuff. Like Move is definitely clearly a bit more inconsistent compared to normal, like just standard Stardust Mobius decks, right? Like you want to play Cosmo decks, you can play the Move, but the Move is a little bit more inconsistent. So there's like a trade-off, right? You want to go taller, you play a bit slightly more inconsistent deck, which can run tech, right? And then of course you can still play Hela and then just risk dying to the tech. But if you don't die to the tech, you win. So I think there's like lots of things you can go about right now. There's a lot of them that have definite counters, which is good, right? So lots of things are playable. Everything has counters. The counter decks are not like toxic per se, whereby they're unbeatable. So yeah, I think all around, like we are in a position whereby it's very, you know, everything's kind of like, it kind of can work, you know. So that's a good place to be.
And with that, it's time for us to take our leave. I've been KMBest, he's been Lamby Series, and he's about to take us out.
All right, guys, like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.